In early August of 1991, President Bush arrived in Kiev, and you can see him standing here at the airport with the chairman of the Ukrainian parliament, Leonid Kravchuk. President Bush arrived in Ukraine at a really critical point in negotiations between Moscow and the republics, like Ukraine, over the devolution of power. Bush gave a speech in the Ukrainian parliament that became known as his Chicken Kiev speech because he warned Ukrainians against suicidal nationalism. And that was a really big disappointment for many who'd been pushing for more sovereign powers for Ukraine. Not long after President Bush left Kiev, the whole issue of devolution of powers came to a head. On August 19th, a group of hardline communists in Moscow tried to stage a coup. They were against the Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev's new union treaty with the republics. Gorbachev had been on holiday in his dacha here on the Crimean coast. At the time of the coup, he found himself trapped in his dacha, surrounded by guards, and all communications were cut off. Back in Moscow, very dramatic events were unfolding. The coup leaders had declared a state of emergency, and the president of the Russian Federation, Boris Yeltsin, had denounced the coup. Tanks appeared on the streets, one battalion switched sides and backed Yeltsin, and it was a very, very tense conflict between pro-Yeltsin followers and the coup leaders. Leaders of the Ukrainian opposition group RUK were quick to publicly denounce the coup, and they were really angry with Leonid Kravchuk for not doing the same. So in Ukraine, not much happened. We all just sat and waited to see how events in Moscow would end, and after 3 days, the coup there failed. August 24th was the critical day for Ukraine. RUK had been busy drafting a Declaration of Independence, which it planned to put before a special session of Parliament that had been called for that day. These shots were taken sometime around the 24th, maybe not on the actual day, but they certainly captured the atmosphere on the streets at that time. I remember being in my apartment, which backed onto the square, and running down and seeing these people just flooding into the square. They marched up to Parliament. They were very much a pro-independence group. They'd gathered in the centre of the city, and they marched up to Parliament where the MPs were debating the independence motion. The debate took some time. Hardline communists in the Ukrainian parliament were against independence, and it was hard to see what make them change their mind and vote for independence. People in the crowd outside planned to block the doors so no one could leave parliament until the vote for independence had gone through. They worried that some of the communists might try and sneak out, depriving parliament of the quorum that it needed for a vote. As the debate was going on, news broke that Yeltsin had suspended Communist Party activities up in Moscow. And it was right after that announcement that the Ukrainian parliament voted for independence. I think maybe the hardline communists were scared by what happened in Moscow and partly voted for independence as an act of self-preservation. The blue and yellow flag had always been a really important symbol of Ukrainian independence. I remember when I first traveled into Ukraine by train in the spring of 1990, looking out the window and seeing the blue and yellow flag flying in western towns that had always been in the vanguard of the independence movement. But as the train advanced towards Kiev, it was the official Soviet flag that flew over buildings. Right after the vote for independence, this enormous blue and yellow flag appeared in the crowd gathered outside Parliament. A group of deputies took the flag and brought it into the chamber where they'd just taken the historic vote. You can see them here bringing the flag up to the front of the chamber and draping it over the area where Leonid Kravchuk sat. And of course, you can also see a big statue of Lenin still mounted in a nook above. The next day, authorities sealed the Communist Party headquarters in Kiev. The blue and red Soviet flag was still Ukraine's official flag, but in early September, Parliament passed a resolution to allow the blue and yellow flag to fly for some official ceremonies, and you can see it being raised here for the first time over Parliament. But the decision was taken to raise it along with the Soviet blue and red flag, and you can just hear the crowd below incensed by that decision. As they see the two flags flying together in the wind, the crowd below rushes towards the doors of Parliament, trying to, in effect, storm it to protect the blue and yellow flag, and they're shouting shame. Lenin was the next target. A huge red granite Lenin statue dominated Kiev's central square, the Maidan. Almost right after the independence vote, this statue became a target for graffiti. City council authorities struggled to try to figure out how to get rid of it. It was easy enough to dismantle the metal figures at the base. You can see workers here on the job night and day to get rid of those smaller metal figures. Getting rid of Lenin was a much tougher job. Authorities thought about blowing him up, but they worried that they might damage infrastructure below. And for a while, they even considered firing acid pellets to dissolve the statue. But in the end, they resorted to jackhammers and chipped away for months. It was in December 1991 that more key events occurred. On December 1st, Ukraine held a referendum that confirmed Parliament's vote on independence. Ukrainians also elected Leonid Kravchuk as their first president. He was sworn in, and shortly after that flew to Belarus for a critical meeting with the Russian leader Boris Yeltsin and the Belarusian leader Stanislav Shushkevich. At that meeting, those leaders in effect declared the Soviet Union dead. On Christmas Day, Gorbachev resigned, and by the end of the year, the Soviet Union formally ceased to exist.